What is going on, guys? It's a little bit after, I believe it's January 2nd, so we're just getting over the holiday seasons. I'm out here recording in the rain, which I'm under a porch. Got two dogs below me that you can't even see. But today I want to talk about this new channel. Maybe you've seen it on my feed, maybe you haven't, I don't know, but it's a new channel I'm involved with, and it's called Faith Football Friends. You can see Thor's nose right here. But it's called Faith Football Friends, and it involves me and two of my friends from college, two of my best friends who are fellow ministers. Thor, stop that. And we still talk today. We still have conversations today, messaging every single day. And anyways, what Faith Football Friends is it's a podcast with a YouTube channel, link in the description of both of those. I hope you'll check it out, where we talk about matters of faith every single week. We'll then go into a portion of talking about football, because we all love football, especially the NFL. We talk about that. We've had such discussions as, is Drew Brees secretly the GOAT? Is he secretly the GOAT? You'll have to check that out. And then the friends portion is just what's going on in our everyday lives. Anyways, I hope you'll check that out. As I said, we're just after Christmas. And after I'm done talking here, the next portion of this video is going to be the Christmas segment that we actually had. Is it okay for Christians to celebrate or participate in the Christmas holiday? Is the Christmas holiday pagan? Did it come from a pagan religion? That's what some claim, and some preachers are out there and they're saying you cannot participate in Christmas because it came from a pagan ritual, and it's sinful for you to participate in Christmas. Is Santa Claus, do we make him out to be more than he actually is, or more than we should be? Stick around, find out. I hope you'll subscribe to this other channel. I hope you'll check out the podcast. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to leave a like, a comment, and subscribe for more content. See you later.
It didn't always work out, but we got something interesting for you guys today. We're going to talk about Christmas in the first place. So Chris, what are some, wow, that's funny. Christmas, there you go. What are some questions about Christmas you think are kind of on the tip of people's tongues? It seems like every December time in the year.
Yeah, I think that there are lots of questions that people begin to ask. Really, like, how do we know when Jesus was born? Can we know when Jesus was born? Is Christmas something I should celebrate as a religious holiday? Or is it something I should just celebrate as a day to get gifts? Who is Santa Claus? And do we give him this divine superpower, or do we kind of cast him out to be like God? And I think some people even ask if it's ethical to do Santa Claus and to play that role when it's not necessarily a true thing. It's not a true thing. It's kind of like a lie that parents are telling their kids to some degree. And so there's just tons of things brought out about Christmas that I think a lot of people question. I'm excited to hear you all kind of wrestle with some of these ideas.
Yeah, that whole Christmas like Santa thing is pretty tough for me, but we can touch on that later. Cole, I know you've got some stuff on like whether or not we can know in the first place when Jesus was born, and secondly, like, was it December 25th?
Yes. Just letting you guys know, Forrest has a really funny story. Can't wait to get on that. But was Jesus born on Christmas? I actually found out there's more in the Bible about this topic than I had realized. I thought for the longest time we were just living off tradition, and the Bible didn't really say much concerning when Jesus was born. And while it is the case that it's never put forth out there, there's no writing that says Jesus was born on this date, we can put the puzzle pieces together, if you will, and come pretty close. So it just so happens if you read Luke chapter 1 and Luke chapter 2, you'll come to the conclusion that Jesus was conceived after Elizabeth was pregnant for 6 months. So when John the Baptist was conceived, and then 6 months later, that's when Jesus was conceived. The interesting thing is we actually know when John the Baptist was conceived. So therefore, if we know when John the Baptist was conceived, we can add up 6 months to know when Jesus was conceived. And the reason we know when John the Baptist was conceived was because his father, Zechariah, served with the priestly division of Abijah. And we actually know when he would have served in the temple each year because of 1 Chronicles chapter 24, verses 7 through 19, where it lists that this division of Abijah was to serve on the 8th week out of the year. And it was actually a rotation. So Zechariah would have had to go and serve in the temple twice a year, basically. And so when Zechariah served, when he would have got done, that's when John the Baptist was conceived. And when we add that up, it comes to the time of either September or March. It's either September or March that Jesus was born. And so it's not December. It's not December 25th. It would have either been September or March. Another piece of evidence, maybe you're out there and you think, well, things could have changed from Chronicles to the time of Jesus, and how these priests served in the temple, and maybe the Jewish calendar changed, but there's no evidence of that I'm aware of. And we know from how we copied the scriptures that man, they were precise. They didn't make errors, and maybe they made small errors, but everything was done methodically, especially how the priests served. But there's more evidence for against December, and that's in Luke chapter 2, verse 8. I'm going to read this real quick. Luke chapter 2, verse 8 says, "And in the same region there were shepherds out in the field, keeping watch over their flock by night." So these shepherds were out in the field with their sheep. They were keeping watch, and it's at this time that the angel comes to them and tells them that the Messiah has been born. And this is good to know because shepherds, they don't go out when it's cold. They don't go out in the winter months. That's when the sheep are kept indoors. So again, we can tell from there that it wouldn't have been December. Jesus was either born in September or March. I believe it's most likely September due to certain events such as the Passover and other things lining up. But yeah, that's what I've studied.
That's pretty neat. I've never heard the connection between John the Baptist's birth and conception to Jesus's conception to point away from December, but I had heard about, like, the shepherds not actually being out in the field in December and stuff. And I think that's very interesting, and I think that's a lot of really good insights, Cole.
I appreciate it. There's two assumptions here that would really break this down, and that's if you could prove somehow that these priests weren't so methodical when they served in the temple. I don't think you can do that, but if someone could prove that assumption wrong, or if they could prove that these shepherds actually did go out in the winter months, if you could prove both those things, then you could keep the December date. But until then, we know it wasn't December.
Yeah, I think I totally see what you're saying, but for me, the whole thing still just feels too speculative. You know what I mean? Like,
Really, yeah.
There's so many variables, and a lot of math is involved. Like, we're assuming Mary carried Jesus to term and all this different stuff, because you can give birth to a viable baby without doing the whole 9 months.
Right.
I'm not saying that totally wipes it out, but I also feel like I can't be sure personally that he wasn't born in December. I'm not saying December 25th, but you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I mean, let's say he was born in March, which is completely possible. It's also possible that Mary only held him for 7 months, right? That happens today. So, correct me if I'm wrong, right? Babies are born only 7 months, right?
yeah, sometimes. I mean,
yeah.
Obviously there's some health things with premature babies that they wouldn't be able to deal with in the first century. But I mean, I think carrying to term all the way isn't necessarily like I know it for sure. It's not 100% of the time, you know?
Yeah, and it also leans very heavily on the shepherds thing. Like, when I was studying this, I kept reading that, and that's why I brought it to the table. But I'm not sure. Like, at some point, these sheep have to go outside to use the bathroom or something, right? I mean, am I wrong here?
No, I was wondering the same thing. Like, what do you do with the sheep? Like, yeah, it's cold outside, but like, are they? And maybe I just am ignorant of ancient shepherding practices, which is, that's 100% accurate. But like,
Yeah.
at the same time, like, what do you do? Like, it's not like they're like in Canada.
Yeah.
It's not -2 degrees in December. It's still like 50, 60 degrees.
I mean, did they? I guess maybe they could have brought the hay or whatever to the sheep, but I don't know. Who knows? I'm not. I'm ignorant as you are on ancient shepherding practices.
But we'll post some of these links in the show notes, because there are a lot of good like scholarly articles I know you were looking at that talked about when Jesus may have been born. And I know I've read some of the same ones you have, and I do think there is a strong case for, especially September sticks out in my mind. But I don't know, like today, so we're recording this the day after Christmas, which is crazy to think about. This year really flew by, but I just looked it up. It's 44 degrees right now in Jerusalem. So that is pretty chilly.
Is it? I'm thinking about my dogs, right? I have a German Shepherd and a Husky, and they want to be outside. They do not care. If it's 20 degrees, they want to be outside. And I know some people are like, bring your dogs in, and of course, if it's -5 degrees, but they have fur or whatever, hair. And I was thinking about this. When humans want to get warm, what do? We kill an animal and we wear its fur or its hide or whatever to get warm. But they naturally have that. So is 44 degrees really? I don't know.
And I think too, like I think we kind of draw this story out to kind of fit the way that it's always been told and the way like we like to think about it. I think you might be onto something. Like they could have gone out into the field to let their like sheep eat a little bit, to let them, like use the restroom or whatever, and then then on their way back indoors. Like just because they were out there, at all doesn't mean that they were out there the entire night.
Yeah, and it's very easy to just keep. I guess it would have been easy for me to just, a scholar said this, so it must be true. There's the side of, well, maybe that scholar just read from another scholar and put it there. But it's also the case that maybe these scholars know things we don't know about shepherding. Who knows?
Yeah, that's a good point. But without seeing the work behind the work of shepherds not being outside at all in the month of December, that's one of the weaker arguments, in my opinion. Yep. Meanwhile, because I know it's cold some places in September, I just looked it up. The average temperature in and around Jerusalem in September is a high of 82 and a low of 65, which sounds perfect.
It really does.
It's some good weather right there. Land of milk and honey.
In September.
Yeah, man. Promised land. Literally. Okay, but I think this all begs the question, and Chris touched on this a little bit in his opening questions. If that's the case, what's up with December 25th? And this is something that is probably it's almost unexpectedly super controversial. Like, I did not expect there to be as much controversy over this as there is. But there is church tradition. There we go. Try not to slur my words. Dating December 25th as a celebration of Christmas really to like the 2nd century. And part of this is there's this idea, and there's a couple of, and we'll throw these links in the show notes as well, but there's a couple of scholarly works that back this up, that December 25th is an early date for Christ's birth, but the way they got there is kind of shady or suspect, in my opinion, with our logical thinking. Not that I'm like an expert in logic, but so the idea is, I guess there was this like tradition in the Jewish mindset that obviously translated into Christianity, that prophets for whatever reason, would die. If they were martyred, they would be killed on the same day they were conceived. And it's this idea of integral age is what it's called. And I don't know if it's just like completing the life circle or whatever. Like, I don't know why that tradition is there, but it's this idea of, prophets that are martyred are killed the same day they were conceived. And early on, the date settled because we know it pretty surely, the date that Jesus was crucified. Because when you look at, when it was around the Passover and whatnot, it was, in the first or second century, it was settled that Jesus was crucified on March 25th. And that was celebrated as like the date of his crucifixion. And so what that means is if March 25th is his crucifixion, and if he was conceived on the same day he was crucified, following that Jewish tradition way of thinking, then he would have been conceived on March 25th. And then, of course, 9 months after March 25th is December 25th. So the idea is that early Christians not really celebrated, but recognized December 25th as the date of the Jesus being born. Stuff of that way of thinking, which I know, like, to our modern mindset, I feel like does not make any sense at all.
I think the big picture here is that, we don't really know when Jesus is born. Or at least that's what I'm kind of learning from this conversation, is that, we can't say Jesus was definitely born December 25th, and we can't really say that he was definitely born in March or September or, any time. I think what it really shows is that that's not really important. That's not something that, God wanted to reveal to us in his holy word. Yeah, there are some evidences that we can look at, sure. But I think ultimately to say Jesus was definitely born December 25th, or that he was definitely born in September, or that he was definitely born in March, is kind of futile and kind of arrogant to make that claim. And I think that we all just need to be just aware of that and understand that, we can't know for sure when he was born.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that.
And there is, too, I would just say this as kind of a cautionary tale. I hear this a lot, that Christmas was like a ripoff of a pagan holiday or pagan celebration, particularly the Sol Invictus celebration of the Roman Empire, which means unconquered sun, S-U-N, not S-O-N. And it was kind of this deification of the sun. And it was like a sun cult, really. But, and we'll post this link in the show notes, too, there's been a lot of scholarly work done on the idea that that is really a myth. And some people say that idea that Christians ripped off Christmas from paganism, some people say it started in the 12th century with pagan people who were, anti-Christians. And then some people say it started later in like the 17th century with a guy named Paul Ernest Jablonski, who did a lot of work about, all these different parts of Christianity were just paganizations and taken from paganism into Christianity. But there's at least two like watershed scholarly works done on this idea of that's not the case. And there's even evidence that Christians recognize Jesus' birth as December 25th before the whole sun worship started, the whole sun cult started in the Roman Empire, because that was something that didn't really start until like the late 200s. So a lot of debate over that. Again, just like the date, it just feels like one of those things we can't really know for sure. So it seems kind of silly to be hard and fast either way, given the fact that the Bible is really silent about when the date was.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. You mentioned this sun god worship and people claiming that Christians copied off that writing that you're speaking of. I actually found out that it comes from a guy named Cyrus. So somebody, or the name, or what we assume to be the name Cyrus, wrote that document. And the word Cyrus actually just means Syrian. So I'm an American. This would have been a Syrian. That's all that word means. And as you claimed, it was written in the 12th century, but the document claims to be talking about the 4th century, which was 800 years before this document was even written. So that's a lot of tradition. Where did this, just average Syrian, if you will, come up with these things? And why are we holding so much weight on a document talking about 800 years ago, essentially?
Crazy. That's a good point. And we'll post that link in the show notes as well. That's a good point. So let's talk about everybody's favorite overweight aged man, Santa Claus.
Yeah, let's please do that. I was really confused as to where you were going with that. I thought we were like jumping to like Christmas traditions or something. I was really scared. But yeah, let's talk
Where
about Santa
else?
Claus.
What other anything? Like, think about this idea. You pay money. Well, not us. None of us are. Well, I guess Cole's a parent. Okay, so let me just rephrase this. I don't think any of us have done this, but in our culture, you pay money to let your child sit on a stranger's lap while you take pictures.
Right.
That's crazy because of Santa Claus.
I will say this. I just thought about this. I thought you were going to say we pay money for our children, like with presents, and then we tell them some stranger once again bought it for them. But I guess
No, that's crazy too.
Yeah, no,
Still-
that is weird.
well, don't do a good thing to expect credit. So that's kind of biblical. But anyways.
Okay. So this is the part I'm most excited for, talking about Saint Nicholas, who you might know him as Old Saint Nick, later developed into the myth of Santa Claus and how he actually was a real historic person.
Tell me more. Tell me more. Na, 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 na.
Nice. Good Greece throwback there. So Saint Nicholas was a 4th century bishop who was from Myra, which is like in modern day Turkey. And pretty interesting backstory. Lost his parents at a young age, was raised by his uncle, inherited a lot of wealth, and he dedicated his fortune and his life to the Christian church. So he was just like just bought in, gave a lot of money, very charitable guy. And he was the bishop of Myra in that area during that time. And this was a time of like really intense persecution under the Roman Emperor Diocletian, who reigned from 284 to 305. That's when he first became a Christian. He spent time in jail. He spent time persecuted, but he lived, kind of fortunate for him, to see Constantine legalize Christianity. And after that happened, of course, we're familiar with the Council of Nicaea, which happened in Constantine's summer home in 325. And it's, known as the First Ecumenical Council, and I'm doing air quotes as I say that. But this was really about the deity of Christ. And that was one of the main issues. And there was a guy there named Arius, whose doctrine, we now know it now as Arianism, is essentially, that Jesus is less than God the Father, less God than God the Father. Nicholas was so mad about this, he jumped from his seat, ran across like the room they were talking in, and punched Arius in the face. Closed fist.
And the best part about this is like I can't help but imagine this guy wearing a red and white suit with a Santa hat, like act all of this out. You know what I mean? Like that's all I can help but imagine this guy wearing.
He definitely probably had a beard. All the images of him have beards. And he did, like, during this time in church history, bishops did wear like a special little hat. So it's not totally far off, I don't think. But obviously, he didn't become Santa Claus just by punching a heretic in the face. There's more to the story. And it really comes from he was super generous to children. And because, his parents died at a young age, he had a lot of money. He felt this Christian call to, be charitable. And Myra, where he lived, was a busy port city. And he would load up ships going throughout the Mediterranean with like money and gifts for children. And sailors would kind of spread this myth. Not this myth, but it became legendary. They would talk about the generosity of Bishop Nicholas, how generous he was, everything like that. So he started to become related to or associated with December because his death, the date of his death, is believed to be December 6th, and he became a saint. And after his death, so then his saint's day is December 6th. That's where he's recognized with the fast and whatnot in certain traditions. But really after he died and became a saint, this myth just grew and grew. He became a legend. There were lots of depictions of him carrying this bulging sack with coins and gifts and whatnot. But as that legend moved northward, as Christianity did, and into Germany and the Netherlands, the Dutch word for Saint Nick was Sinterklaas. That's how people referred to him. and that led to the German Santa Claus as we now know him today. And it goes a step further. Martin Luther was also involved a little bit because he wanted, people were giving gifts. Catholics would give gifts to each other in December in the name of St. Nicholas on his day, December 6th. But Martin Luther wanted almost like a Protestant alternative to the Roman Catholic practice of the Feast of St. Nicholas. So instead of giving gifts on his day in his name, he started the tradition of giving gifts in the name of the Christ child, which is, Jesus Christ as a baby, on Christmas Eve. So on December 24th, Luther said, we'll give each other's gifts in the name of baby Jesus, essentially. And the German word for Christ child is Christkindl, from which we get the name Kris Kringle, another name for Santa Claus, of course. So all that came together, and that's where, Santa Claus, Old St. Nick, Kris Kringle all came through that. So it started in the early church, developed through the Middle Ages, and then even Luther added to it in the Reformation. And that's our guy, delivering gifts and punching heretics. What a man.
For all of our listeners out there, if your head just exploded, you are not alone. My mind is blown.
And I'll post a link to all that too.
Wow. I mean, Kris Kringle, that's all these names, the history of their names. I like Chris, I want to know when this red suit got involved. I want to know when the North Pole got involved. I want to know when this guy with a beard decided he knew whether or not I was naughty or nice, right? And he has a list, right?
That's how the
A
song
list
goes.
that he checks it twice, which is a lot of work. Yeah, it's like it's
Unless
just
he's omniscient. Sorry.
No, but let's talk about this since we're there. Do you think, in your guys' experience growing up, was Santa Claus given a godlike quality of omnipotence, omniscience, etc.?
Yes.
Yeah, to some degree. I knew Santa Claus wasn't God, though. You know what I mean? I knew he wasn't a god. He was just a super magical dude. But if you had asked me as a little kid, I think I would have told you, okay, I don't know what you would have asked me as a little kid, but if you kind of asked me, I guess, if Santa Claus was like God, I think I would have I think to some degree I would have defended Santa Claus because in my mind Santa Claus was just such a good guy. Santa Claus was definitely a Christian. Santa Claus definitely believed in God. Santa Claus definitely prayed multiple times a day. But at the same time, as I got older, I do think I began to kind of question the similarities between God and Santa Claus. And I think I did identify a danger there. But I don't know that I would have said that he had godlike powers. But maybe I would have. I don't know.
Building off what you just said, I mean, I too wanted to defend Santa Claus, right? He's such a good guy, and that's the point. He's all loving. He has a list. He's all knowing. Not that I'm not talking here, and I know we're going to talk about this later. At least I think we are. I'm not necessarily saying it's wrong to let your kids believe in Santa Claus, but I am concerned that there is a line that that definitely gets passed or gets crossed where it's are we deifying him? We're making our children believe in him, and then when they're 8 or 9, they no longer do, and they're oh, it was all a lie. Well, what happens when they ask the same thing about God? Was that all a lie too, Mom? That's what's gonna happen.
Wow, that got deep.
But here's the problem with that, Cole. You're proposing on one hand that this guy dresses up in a red suit and loads enough presents for the entire world into a sleigh, and then carries them around the world. And we give him we give him, I guess, a 24-hour period to do this. And so then he flies to every house delivering presents, and then gets back on December 25th to start all over and getting it ready again next year. I understand what you're saying, and I agree, and is it sort of dangerous? Yeah, I think so. But I think whenever you look at what you're proposing with Santa Claus and what he accomplishes and what you're proposing that God accomplishes, one is way more logical. One's way more like, yeah, okay, I see that God could do this. I don't see that Santa Claus could do this. Like, I think to some degree saying, wait, you mean the earth has a designer? Well, yeah, okay, that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like, I think that is a way easier to accept than to say, oh, yeah, this guy dresses up in a red suit and flies around with a bunch of reindeer to deliver presents. You know what I mean? Like, does that make sense?
I get what you're saying, and it's definitely there is a difference there, but you just brought up another thing about God is all powerful, right? And I was thinking to myself when I was joking, slightly joking a minute ago, like Santa Claus isn't all powerful, but maybe Santa Claus is all powerful in the sense that he can be everywhere at once. He can fit 1 million Christmas presents in a small bag, right? I don't know. I don't know, Chris.
See, I think Chris has a point here though, because like for the mind of a child, there might not be that big of a difference. But I think like big picture, there is like it's on its face ridiculous. The whole Santa Claus thing is. You know what I mean? Like if you were to try to introduce that to an adult, you would have a really, really hard time convincing them.
Yes.
Meanwhile, you do have logically sound and valid ways to demonstrate the existence of God. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and let me just say on the front, I didn't come into this podcast with the idea of saying Christmas or teaching our kids that Santa Claus is bad, but now that we're discussing it, it is a little bit concerning to me at least, and maybe to some listeners, not to everyone, maybe not to you guys, but it is a little bit concerning to me that Santa does in some sense have a godly qualities to his legend, even if it is just for children that would believe in him.
With that being said, I'm going to share this story that you alluded to earlier. Well, let me say this first. It really depends on your household. Like I think you guys obviously were raised, differently than I was, and I mean that's true for everybody. But like my wife, for example, her family's Jamaican. There was no attempt to try to convince my wife when she was a child that Santa Claus existed. There were not gifts from him under the tree. He did not come in their house to do stuff. Like any inkling of an idea of Santa Claus that they got from kids at school, the culture around them, the movies on TV. It was not at home at all. And my wife was the girl who like would look at people who believed in Santa in elementary school and think they were kind of stupid.
Wow.
I'm the total opposite. I believed in Santa as a kid as much as you can believe in anything. And I had proof for Santa Claus. My parents, especially my dad, orchestrated so many elaborate schemes that, like, dude, I was just hook, line, and sinker a Santa Claus believer.
That rhymed, bro.
Look for that on my upcoming Christmas album. But okay, so this is kind of the pinnacle of my devotion to Santa Claus. You know that have you guys seen that movie? It's a classic. I hope you've seen it. The Christmas Story movie.
Yep.
Yeah, we've seen it. I've seen it.
It plays like just over and over again, like Christmas Eve and Christmas Day.
Yeah.
So that was like yes, exactly. That was like a big part of like my childhood Christmas, I guess, experience. And we were watching that movie, and you know how he really wants that Red Ryder BB gun, and he finally gets it. Well, we were watching it, and that part happened, and my dad, and I'm not faulting him for this. Like, I love him. He was just trying to have a good experience, whatever. My dad looks at me, and he's like, wouldn't it be great if you got a BB gun from Santa Claus tomorrow morning? And I was like, yeah, that would be awesome. Like, I'd never wanted a BB gun before in my life, but after watching that movie and talking to my dad, like, I wanted it more than anything. But like, it's Christmas Eve. I can't send him a letter to the North Pole. What am I going to do? How am I going to ask Santa for this BB gun? So I essentially prayed to Santa Claus. Like, there's no other way to explain that. Like, I closed my eyes and bowed my head and was like in my head, "Dear Santa, you know, please bring me this BB gun." Of course, my dad already had purchased the BB gun, and I woke up the next morning to find the BB gun under the tree, and it was like 100% an affirmation to me that not only is Santa Claus real, but Santa Claus hears and answers prayer. Which obviously, like, we're talking about deifying Santa Claus. I mean, if you're praying to somebody, that's like almost as deified as you can get.
Absolutely. Like, it
Yeah.
very much so is like, and every time that we've heard that story before, like, we have died laughing, because it is kind of comical, but like, it does kind of prove Cole's point to some degree, not to the extent that Cole was pushing it maybe, but it does, I think, suggest that it can be dangerous.
That is undoubtedly like too far, and not. I'm not saying anything about your dad. Your dad just wanted his child to have a great Christmas, and so culturally speaking, I'm like, go dad. But at the same time, I'm not sure God was pleased with that prayer for us.
Well, yeah, probably not. But at the same time, God knew I was a 7-year-old. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, and it kind of, I don't know. Like, to this day, I still consider that BB gun the greatest Christmas gift I've ever had,
Right.
just because of the situation around it. But I definitely do not pray to Santa Claus anymore.
I am glad to hear that.
Yeah, I'm glad. I'm very glad, man. We can still be brothers.
All right.
I will say this.
Go ahead.
My mom has definitely like questioned whether or not she would do it if she had it to do all over again. Like my little brother is 17 now, so he's kind of over the whole Santa Claus stage. But like, my mom has talked about how she would definitely do it differently if we were, babies again. And she says she would just play Santa. It's like, okay, y'all need to go to bed because I've got to go play Santa, or something along those lines, where like Santa Claus is still involved, but it's viewed as a game from the beginning. And I think that way, like, you do kind of still get to have like the fun with Santa, but like, you also understand the fact that, like, okay, yeah, Santa isn't anywhere near God at all, and it's just, I don't know, it's an idea. I don't think people are bad if they teach their children about Santa Claus, or if they teach their children nothing about Santa Claus. I don't think that at all, but I think it's just interesting from my mom's point of view that she would do it differently if she had it to do all over again.
Yeah.
That is interesting. Cole, you're a father. Did you guys do the whole Santa Claus thing this year?
Oh yeah, we did Santa Claus, and it was awesome to see Titus. Looking forward to his presents and everything. And I guess I'm on the fence here, and I hate to say that, but this discussion, I imagine the listeners right now are the same way. In some senses, is like, on the one hand, after everything we've talked about, I'm like, man, what are we doing to Santa? And then on the other hand, Christmas is my favorite holiday. It's probably everyone here's favorite holiday. And I don't want to be too legalistic about this. It's something that I need to ponder. I don't know, man. I just got to think about this. I'm glad we talked about it.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And I think there's nothing wrong with thinking about stuff. I mean, that's why we're here, man.
That's why we're friends, I think, too. Like, we all like
Yeah.
thinking about things together. I think that's what we do whenever we
For
get
sure.
together, really.
Oh yeah.
For sure. So this idea of, Cole, you mentioned being legalistic, I think brings us to this idea, or this question of, since we don't know when Jesus is born, since religiously at least, in a lot of, Christendom, December 25th is celebrated as Jesus' birthday, it begs the question, would it be wrong for us to observe it in even a somewhat religious way, keeping in mind the birth of Jesus?
I'll lead the discussion by saying absolutely not. I think Christmas is such a great thing, especially in our culture in a time where everybody's trying to take down, at least it seems, Christianity, right? We hear the stories of Islam as perhaps being treated better than Christianity is today, and we, certainly don't agree with the scriptures of Islam, or I can't think of the book's name right now, but there's so many people around the world when Christmas comes around. Sure, they hear about Santa Claus, but at the same time, they also hear about Christ in the name of Christmas, and they hear about the virgin birth of our Savior, our Lord and Savior. So I think it's absolutely spectacular.
I kind of come from a unique situation in the fact that my family, on like my dad's side of the family, like they're all Christians. We all like would agree on most things biblically, and yet like that side of family celebrates nothing like religiously about Christmas. Like it's all about like presents and just getting together and have fun. But then on my mom's side of the family, like the side of the family that isn't, like they're not all Christians. A lot of them don't go to church. A lot of them don't do things that I'm proud of, but at Christmas, almost every year, like Jesus's birth is talked about, or it's read from, the account's read from Luke, and we all sit there and we listen to the Bible being read. And it's kind of hard for me to say that anything that gets people into their Bibles is a bad thing. Like if you are reading God's word, it is a good thing. I no matter what. And so for that reason, like I absolutely agree with what Cole's saying. Like anything that points people to God's word, anything that points people to Jesus is absolutely a good thing.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I appreciate that perspective, against people's. And I think there is a certain cultural benefit, from a Christian worldview of having everybody, even if they're not devout, at least thinking about Jesus, But that being said, I do think it would be wrong to kind of bind one way or the other, to either say like some traditions in Christendom do that you have to celebrate December 25th as the birth of Jesus, to bind that, or to say like you can't make this religious at all. And there's an article recently written by Neil Pollard, who's a preacher in the church, and he talks about how he's kind of been, in the past, he was really judgmental of people who had these religious elements in their celebration of Christmas. But then he started talking about, there's a passage I've been ignoring for like my whole life. And he brought up Romans 14:5-10. And I'll just read it for us real quick. There, Paul, writing in the context of, eating meat sacrificed to idols, says, one person regards one day above another regards each day alike. Each person must be fully convinced in his own mind. He who observes the day observes it for the Lord, and he who eats does so for the Lord, for he gives thanks to God, and he who eats not for the Lord he does not eat, and gives thanks to God. For not one of us lives for himself, and not one dies for himself. For if we live for the Lord. If we die for the Lord. Therefore, whether we live or die, we are the Lord's. For to this end Christ died and lived again, that he might be Lord both of the dead and of the living. But you, why do you judge your brother? Or you again, why do you regard your brother with contempt? For we will all stand before the judgment seat of God. And it's just a reminder, if I want to personally regard December 25th over some random day, I do have that right to do that. I think that passage teaches that. Now, that doesn't mean I can bind it on other people. But, this idea of we do have this liberty in Christ to, as long as we are not sinning, to do these things, and it's just like between me and God, and I can't, as a fellow Christian, really, I shouldn't at least, contempt, be mad at you about it, or should judge you about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Unless I see Forrest praying to baby Santa Claus or whatever you want to say, it's none of my business if he's celebrating Christmas with his family.
And it's like, and whether he's celebrating it and focused on Santa, or whether or not he's celebrating it and focused on Jesus, I think there's liberty to do it either way.
Yeah, that's a good point. And some people bring up certain passages like in Colossians 2 and then in Galatians 4 where Paul is talking about people who bind certain days in the celebration and observance of them. But this, by and large, was not only, the practice of Judaizers, but is also this idea of, if you're binding it on somebody. And there are those who would say like the Old Testament holidays, the Old Testament observances, the Old Testament celebrations and festivals, those are still like you still have to recognize those as a Christian. And Paul's saying, no, that's not the case. But at the same time, if I have a day that I personally, without binding on other people, lift above another, it seems like, throughout the Bible, you get a lot of passages about these kinds of conscience things where, you do have the liberty to do that as long as you're not binding on others and, your brethren are to respect that and not judge you for it.
So you're suggesting then that, I'm just making sure I understand, that in Galatians 4 and in Colossians 2, it's a matter of Paul stressing the point that it shouldn't be bound on people rather than that they should, like, special days should just not be recognized at all.
Yeah, definitely. Galatians 4 is all about, not just Galatians 4, sorry, the book of Galatians is all about people being, Paul uses some of his strongest language in Galatians about those who seek to be justified by observing the law and by holding to the law and by not trusting in Jesus' redemptive work on the cross, but in their own ability to keep these things and hold on to these things. So that's definitely what he's addressing there. And then in Colossians 2, I almost misspoke. It actually is the other way around. And Paul says that no one is to act as your judge in regard to food or drink in respect to a festival or a new moon or a Sabbath day. And that's in Colossians 2:16. So it's actually flipped, this idea of, look, nobody's your judge in these things. If you can do them conscientiously, you have that right. But again, you can't read any verse in a vacuum. You got to look at what all the Bible says. And I know we all know that, but combined with Galatians, if you're binding it, it's wrong. But I think you still have that liberty. I think Paul brings that out pretty clearly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, thanks. I appreciate that clarification.